Dad, I just need to know that you're okay. I wake up at night, I don't know where you are. I know that I haven't been the best mom, and I miss your brother so much.
Hello, I'm Elise Chaffins, and today I'm joined by writer and director Andrew Bell and actor John Howley to talk about the film Bleeding, coming to ScreamBox and VOD on June 10th. Thank you both so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having us.
yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to kind of start, can you give just a quick synopsis of Bleeding? Andrew, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, John will probably do better, but I'll try. It follows his character, Eric, and his cousin Sean. They're living in this world where kind of like the basic version of it is like vampire blood is being harvested as a drug. Um, John's character has lost his brother the year before, and he's seeing like his cousin and best friend kind of go down the same path, and tries to stop him from that. Digs them both into deep doo-doo, as they say, and get crazy from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Andrew, just can you talk a little bit about your process of working on this film from like script development through the actual shooting of it?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, it kind of started out as a short film that kind of never happened. It was supposed to be my thesis at Columbia,
Okay.
back in 2020, in like May of 2020. If you remember what's
Ah,
happening there?
perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing. Ended up the short version of that story is ended up getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and then kind of canceled. And like everyone else, I was kind of like stuck inside back in my I'd fled back to Seattle from New York. I was in my childhood home, and all this stuff from my teenage years kind of came rushing back at me. Um, I grew up in the early 2000s in the Pacific Northwest. It was kind of like beginnings-ish of like the opioid crisis that was happening there with OxyContin and everything. So a lot of stuff me and my friends were going through just kind of came rushing back. I realized that like the short film that I had that had been much more about uh these two like 14-year-old kids smoking their first joint in the woods and then stumbling on a vampire kind of thing.
Mhm.
Was actually the setup for something a little bit more reflective and exciting for me, maybe. I spent a year drafting and redrafting, and then I hit up some old collaborators, some producers from Columbia, where I went to grad school and where John just graduated, by the way,
Oh,
from
congratulations.
undergrad, and got the team together and just started trying to make it happen. And
Yeah, yeah. So, John, this film has just so much physicality in it. Can you just talk about, yeah, preparing for that and yeah, just going through all those action scenes?
Well, like Andrew was saying, based on the synopsis, the characters are under a lot of stress. We're dealing with, evil, sinister characters in our town and also kind of vampires. So we're going through a lot. And on the first day we got to set, we were shooting a scene that happens later in the movie after our characters have been through a lot of physical stress and like physical turmoil. So something that Jasper, who plays Sean, and I started to do is that before we do takes, we would kind of wrestle. We would sort of tussle like brothers or something. And in the show, we're cousins and close friends. So it A, helped us build character, but also got us in the physical stance where we're sort of used to fighting and we're getting tired. And so that way, when the shot happens, we look like we've been running around, evading vampires, evading scary, drug dealers. So a big part of the physicality on my end and Sean's end was just kind of tussling with each other, which started out as an activity and just became really fun. But then, of course, in the film, in terms of physicality, we're also all three principal characters, Sarah, Sean, Eric,
Mhm.
they consume different drugs at different points, and Sarah has to, inhabit a vampire. So, not to spoil too much, but a lot of that process happened with our movement coordinator, Jay Dunn, who was instructing us how to physically characterize certain drugs and what they do to the body, and for certain characters, how to inhabit this brand new kind of vampiric thing that we were creating. So it was definitely a physically intense process. And for most scenes, it was just kind of wrestling and getting your body ready. But for a lot of it, it was actually a lot of intense prep to inhabit characters on drugs or who are vampires.
He was
Yeah,
working closely
sorry, go
with
ahead.
Jeff Canick too, our stunt
Yes.
coordinator. They were kind of like this
Mhm.
team. They play Hank and David in the film. It was very
Yeah.
theater company vibe of everybody doing different jobs. We had these great theater actors who have this wealth of physical theater experience we brought on to do exactly the kind of work that John's talking about, really help us
Yeah, it was great.
at physical performances. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing is just that it's like not just physical in the body, but it's such an emotional
Yeah.
and mental, journey that these characters go on. So yeah, that's really something. One of the things that struck me about this film is kind of how you flip the vampire narrative in this. I don't want to get like too spoilery, but yeah, can you just kind of talk a little bit about that switch, that different framing of vampires in this? Yeah, in a way, I don't know if that's
Yeah.
possible
No,
without giving away too
you haven't spoiled
much.
anything. Um, no, yeah, I mean, I've always looked at. I don't know about you, John, but vampires is oftentimes they can be sympathetic characters,
Mm.
and looking at I think things are changing a little bit, but how traditionally society has kind of looked at people that are dealing with drug addiction. You know what I mean? And the kind of demonization that happens a little bit really made me want to think a little bit about like who are the real monsters in this situation. And I think in our film, it's less about not to give anything away, but it's a little less about the monsters being the monsters, and the real monsters are like the adults in this situation who are, who are taking advantage of kids, who are
Mhm.
Yeah.
exploiting them, or are uh, parents that aren't doing their jobs, that kind of thing. I don't know what your thoughts are, John.
Yeah, well, it situates the vampires really as victims. And I
Yeah.
think that when I first read the script, it was very enlightening because I often in my I love horror, but I don't consume a lot of vampire content. Like Nosferatu in a film class is probably my biggest exposure to vampires. So I thought of vampires as kind of fantastical beasts that were, when on camera, I sort of couldn't necessarily relate to. They were more like paranormal or spooky or, kind of like, unrelatable characters. But in this script, we really ground vampires within the setting of like 2000s America
Mhm.
in relation to drugs, such that they become very sympathetic, as all the characters, in that situation are. So it's like we take these kind of, or Andrew takes these monstrous characters that have a long legacy of being larger than life and unreal and really fixates them into an environment that we recognize and many people live in. And by doing so, they go from monsters into people and almost become more sympathetic because you're so used to seeing them as monstrous that when you consume vampires in this way, there's a lot of sadness and sympathy and like, awareness of the condition of being a monster and made to become a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've never really super connected with vampire movies and everything. They tend to not be my favorite, mostly because I'm more of a zombie girl because I always see the outside as the monster, I guess, and they kind of
Hmm.
reveal. And usually that's not the case with vampires, but I really appreciated this one because it does that to some degree, like
Mhm.
creates shows that the monsters are outside of, the monster, I guess.
Right.
Um, yeah. One of the other things that was interesting to me is that wouldn't necessarily associate like compassion with a vampire horror movie, but there is definitely a thread of compassion that runs through this film, particularly for those dealing with addiction. Now, I'm in West Virginia, so the opioid addiction hit really hard here.
Yeah.
And so that was something I really appreciated the way that you like brought that compassion to the people who are dealing with addiction. Can you talk, really, both of you, just about like creating that idea and then embodying that as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm so glad that I connected with you that way. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what connected everybody that worked on the film uh, together. And that's what I think attracted people to the project so much. The more we talked to just everyone, the more like all of us had kind of been, you know, touched by addiction in different ways. Um, and especially seeing it happen with people that we're close to. And at the end of the day, I think that this is a movie that's really about family and about found family and trying to support the people you love and that feeling. To me, it's always been about Eric's character, especially kind of embodying that feeling of like watching someone you love kind of slip away, slip into something and trying as hard as you can to hold on to them, but it's slipping through your fingers and there's nothing you can do. And that helpless feeling for me is where the real horror of it comes from, kind of.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I've been in that position a lot of times in my life, you know, and I think a lot of people have, and I think that's hopefully what's relatable about the film, or sadly what's relatable about the film, rather.
Yeah. And in like the terms of like Eric's character and other characters in the film, like the refusal to give up, even though it's slowly killing yourself just to try and save the people that you love around you. Like I think the way compassion shows up in this film, as Andrew's saying, is not necessarily in the form of hugs or kind of like pep talks. It's more just people who are there and who are staying there for the people in their lives, even though it's dragging them into like hell. And
Mhm.
that consistency is like the kind of love that's on camera and bleeding. And that made it so hard, but also easy to act. Um, because Eric's motivation is very clear. He loves Sean, he loves his mother, and that love will not let him give up, even at the risk of his physical, emotional safety. So that
Mhm.
level, it takes compassion to a huge extreme in a way that is beautiful and gut-wrenching. And I think that's it kind of shows the double-edged point of compassion, how it can be used to save and used to try and save, and how the one, who's giving compassion can be just so burdened.
And your
Yeah.
character's not addressing his own stuff too. You know what I mean? I think it's
Sure.
that, you know, being
Yeah.
kind of broken and trying to fix everybody else instead of trying to work out
Yeah.
your own stuff.
Yeah, 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 for sure. So just as we kind of wrap up here, what would you want people to like take away from this film if as an audience member, what would you hope that they would come away with from watching Bleeding?
Um, I hope that that feeling of compassion that you walked away with is something they walk away with. Um, they, you know, appreciate the people in their life that are struggling. I think also that it's just, I think when we do these interviews, it's really easy. We talk so much about the addiction side of it and stuff, you know what I mean? Which is important. But I think it's also like it's an exciting movie and
Yeah,
it's fun too, you know.
yeah, for
Mhm.
It's not
sure.
like super dire, but it is
Mhm.
tragic. You know, I hope that they're on the edge of their seat, that it makes them reflect on this stuff and I don't know, get some excited about genre and the possibilities, what you can do with these kind of stories is allegory, is
Yeah.
what I'd say.
Yeah. I would say a similar thing. Like I think bleeding really takes an expansive scope to what is like the monster vampire genre and takes this character archetype of which we're all aware and makes vampires and horror really emotional, really easy to empathize with, root for, root against, all those things. So I think the my favorite thing about bleeding, as I've had to know, as I have had to and chose to watch it many times, is the way that this horror movie and these horror archetypes take me on a huge emotional journey while it's still being a horror movie. Like
Mhm.
it's still a movie where there's vampires and vampires do crazy things and attack people, and yet the vampires doing the attacking are people that you're rooting for and crying for and empathizing with. So it almost takes a horror movie, and not to say that obviously horror movies on their own have many emotions, but it kind of adds a whole new element of sort of emotional investment that I'm biased, but that I feel very strongly when watching this movie as opposed to, maybe the classic vampire flick.
Which is what they've
Yeah.
been doing with zombies for the last 40 years, right, Elise? You know,
Yeah,
it's
I mean that's what I
Yeah.
say. That's why I've
Yeah.
always loved
Yeah,
zombie
exactly.
movies and
Exactly.
TV shows and stuff,
Exactly.
is I think they yeah, just have a better storytelling device than a lot of vampire movies. So it's why this one really struck
Right.
me in a unique way. So yeah. Well, thank you both
Yeah.
so
Now
much
when I
for
see
speaking.
Nosferatu, I'm like, oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna do now when I see a vampire, I'm like, it's okay. I know it must be hard. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And yeah, best of luck with the film.
Thanks so much, Elise.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
thanks, Elise.